All right, let's talk about IT change management. We're going to break down a super clear, structured way to handle IT changes. If you've ever had your day ruined by a surprise IT outage, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. You know the feeling, right? You hear that IT is just doing a simple update, a quick little patch, and then suddenly everything grinds to a halt. A critical system is down. How on earth does that happen? Well, the answer is usually pretty simple. Unstructured changes. It's what happens when things are done without a formal process. See, even a tiny change, if it's not properly planned and vetted, can cause this ripple effect that brings everything crashing down. So, to get a handle on that chaos, here's our game plan. We'll start with why structure is so important. Then, we'll get into the three main types of changes. We'll compare the routine stuff with the bigger plan changes and talk about what to do in a real emergency. And finally, we'll look at a really powerful tool called a change model. The first step to getting control is to realize that not all changes are created equal. So we use a simple framework to sort them into three distinct categories. This way, we can apply just the right amount of oversight depending on what we're dealing with. And here they are, the big three: standard, normal, and emergency. Each one has its own set of rules, its own approval process, and you guessed it, its own level of risk. Let's break them down, starting with the two you'll see most of the time. Okay, let's dig into the bread and butter of IT work. Honestly, understanding the difference between a routine, standard change and a more involved, normal one, that's probably the most important first step you can take. So first up is the standard change. Think of these as the tasks you do all the time. They're predictable, they're super low risk, and because of that, they're pre-approved. There's absolutely no reason to reinvent the wheel every single time you do one. And here are some perfect examples. Resetting someone's password, mapping a new printer for a user, these are classic standard changes. They happen all the time, they're necessary, and there's a clear, well-understood way to get them done. Okay, so what about everything else? Well, that brings us to the normal change. This is for anything that isn't standard and pre-approved. It's for a new service or a big change to an existing one. And because it carries more risk, it needs a formal review before anyone touches anything. And we're talking about much bigger stuff here, right? Things like upgrading a server's operating system or changing the very structure of a database. These aren't routine. They could impact a ton of people, so you've got to plan them out carefully. So if you had to boil it all down to one single difference between standard and normal changes, what would it be? It's this. Does it need approval from the CAB, the Change Advisory Board? For a standard change, the answer's no. For a normal change, almost always yes. And this table really lays out that difference in authority. A standard change gets its power from an existing policy. It's already been signed off on. But a normal change, that needs a specific, fresh green light from the Change Advisory Board, a group of experts who look at the risks before they say yes. Okay, we've covered the routine and the planned. But what happens when things go completely off the rails? What do you do when something breaks right now? Well, that's when you need an emergency change. And let me be perfectly clear about this. This is not for something that's just kinda urgent. An emergency change is for one thing and one thing only: fixing a live system that's down and impacting the business. This is the break glass in case of fire option. So what makes an emergency change special? It's that you intentionally get to bypass the normal, slower review process. In an emergency, speed is everything. The goal is to get the service back online as fast as humanly possible. All the detailed paperwork and review, that can wait until after the fire is out. Now, because the stakes are so high, the authority for this is different. It's usually a smaller, pre-selected group called an emergency CAB, or ECAB, that can get together in minutes. The point is to have a crystal clear line of command so there's no confusion when a crisis hits. So, we have these three types of changes, but how do you make sure you're doing them correctly and safely every single time? Well, that's where this really cool concept called a change model comes in. A change model is basically a template. It's like a recipe. It's a predefined set of steps that lays out exactly what to do, who needs to approve it, and who's responsible for a specific kind of change. It turns a complicated process into a simple checklist. Here's a perfect example. Instead of figuring out how to patch servers from scratch every month, a team can just use their Patch Windows Servers model. It tells them what to do, who signs off, and what the schedule is. It makes the whole thing predictable. And this is why they're such a game changer. When you standardize the process, you get so much faster. You cut down on human error because the steps are spelled out, and you make sure everyone is following the same safe process every single time. It's a huge win. So let's put it all together. This is your complete field guide, all in one spot. Standard changes are pre-approved, no CAB. Normal changes usually need that CAB approval, and emergency changes, they bypass the normal process and use a fast-tracking authority like an ECAB. It's simple, but it's incredibly powerful. You know, it's really important to remember that the goal here is not to create a bunch of red tape and slow everybody down. It's the total opposite. By putting the right level of control on each change, you actually let your teams move faster and, way more importantly, safer. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. Take a look at the work your team does. How could using this simple framework of standard, normal, and emergency changes help you get things done safer and even a little bit faster?